Okay, so to get us started, let me find our questions here. I think that a good question to get us started, if you can both just give us an idea or some context around the partnership between D2L and Turnitin. And Kenneth, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Bart. Thanks for having us today. And for those of you that don't know who D2L are and the context for how we'd be working with Turnitin, we provide an LMS called Brightspace. It would be very similar to what you would be using if you used a Blackboard, Canvas, or Moodle. So, when we think about the way we serve our customers and the ecosystem that organizations using an LMS needs to serve, Turnitin was, as long as I can remember, has been one of those tier one, really necessary tools for us to be able to play nicely in the sandbox with. All the way back as early as, I think it was 2005 probably, we were hearing about how important it was that our assignments tool, the ability to go and submit work into our LMS, had the ability to check for originality, to have the ability for educators to look at potential plagiarism, and to build that into the workflow for how our assignments tool and the Turnitin platform work together. And initially, we really didn't hit our objectives when we were trying to build an integration with Turnitin. Anybody that's used that integration over the years knows what I'm talking about. So we've kind of done a version 1 of our integration with Turnitin and a version 2, as well as a pure LTI integration. One where it's very much not integrated deeply, not our ideal workflow at all, but doing what we could with where the standard was at 1.1. So in our initial integration that we did with Turnitin, we did things like create dummy accounts for every Brightspace user, course, and assignment, which caused our customers headaches in that we quickly hit their max users on Turnitin and their entitlements, and caused support issues, caused friction, consternation on the part of the educators, the administrators. We couldn't support group assignments. It was fragile. We were working with each other's APIs and not through a standard. So, we were hand-holding between the two organizations. If something happened, the whole workflow could kind of fall apart like a house of cards at times. And it created a lot of support tickets, manual scripts that needed to be run, general grossness from a software development perspective, and pain on the part of educators, faculty that really needed to use these tools, and the learners that needed access to them. So, we learned a lot over the years that version 1 of the integration was out there. We've since then launched what we call our version 2 of that integration, where we're using the real email addresses of the actual learners. So there's no overrun of user accounts. Thank goodness we're following the LTI standard. So a lot of the things that used to have to be orchestrated manually through proprietary APIs, now like course creation, assignment creation, account creation, that's happening through the LTI standard the way that it should be. We've still got some things we know we need to work out. The way that Turnitin and D2L, they handle dates differently. They have a little bit of different interpretation of those things. So we want to harmonize those. But with that baseline in place where we're working through the LTI standard, we have a common interface. We've got the ability now to start thinking about how do we move that integration forward? How do we start thinking about the lessons learned, the things our customers are telling us going into 2022 to make this better and kind of leave the sins of the past behind us?
Great. Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I mean, Ken has the history there. I've been with Turnitin for a little over a year managing our integration strategy. So I'm learning about the history of a lot of our integrations. And I think the one thing that, I'm also sort of excited about, it speaks to, where we're going, but that we recognize that there is not one workflow for everybody, right? And what we've learned from some of these assignment-based workflows that, in the early days when it was really important to bring, integrity and plagiarism detection into the D2L assignment, has sort of allowed us to also understand what does it mean for us to complement other areas of the Brightspace, I should say the Brightspace assignment, right? The Brightspace experience, and making sure we get that right with LTI 1.3, so that, as a tool provider and as a core, LMS where, really there's a lot of collaboration between students and instructors, there's as much like symbiotic, I'd say, benefit to both the instructor experience in our tool as well as the instructor and student experience in Brightspace. So really that's our focus, is figure out what is LTI 1.3 going to solve, and also like what is it not going to solve, right? And where is it important to maintain that sort of deep partnership and deep integration? Standards are great, but they don't solve every problem, right? So it's that analysis that we're now doing to figure out what workflows make sense going forward.
Right. So the second question, and Alex, we'll start with you on the second question here. What are some of the things that are exciting for you and the work at Turnitin taking place there in the rest of 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, as Ken mentioned, Turnitin's we're not a startup by any means. We've been around for a while. And before integration standards really existed, it was clear, I think, to the team here that, being integrated into LMSs as that market was becoming commoditized, as schools were really saying, hey, every school needs an LMS, every instructor really needs to be doing, or course designers need to be building the structure of their pedagogy into an LMS. Turnitin started integrating, right? But over time, you sort of collect integrations like they're souvenirs, right? And so now we have a big bag of souvenirs that we need to deal with. So the thing that I'm really excited about across, our integration strategy is simplification. It's a big tenet for Turnitin going forward. How do we simplify by taking some of these legacy integrations and putting them into a state where they're no longer supported, and having customers migrate to a better experience, or a place where we can innovate faster, and really give them more incremental benefit. I think the worst thing, and being very honest here, that can happen with some of these integrations is they become so sort of convoluted over time that it's hard to then innovate, right? It's hard to add features. And then we're supporting multiple user experiences across different LMSs. It becomes a burden for our support team. It becomes a burden for instructors who have to switch contexts. And so really trying to figure out how to simplify the amount of integrations we support, but also that they all go to the same place. It's the same end product at the end, right? Not, a great example in the D2L, in our V2 experience is you have something that's very native to the Brightspace workflow. But that also, I sort of said this before, but how does that sit next to an experience where it makes sense for, an instructor to get the most benefit out of our Turnitin's tools by sort of going into a rich Turnitin experience, right? So things like anonymous marking or peer groups can be managed, right? And so that's really what it's all about, is simplifying our product, our integration offering, but recognizing that if we have less things to integrate, we can maintain those fewer, the limited set of integrations better, right? And provide faster innovation over time.
Yeah, I like that. Get to more innovation through simplification, right? You need to open up those doors for a lot of that R&D work. So Kenneth, how about on the D2L side?
Yeah, I'm actually going to use the same keyword, simplification, but maybe just from a different lens. And I'll do the traditional walk back in time that most presentations do right now. And, what we've learned throughout COVID was really, we had this massive influx of educators starting to use online learning tools like the LMS. And, they started off doing it in crisis mode, where they were simply throwing things up there and doing the best with what they could. But what really impressed us as we reached out with our community, as we started figuring out what kinds of problems were organizations wrestling and having trouble with, and which ones were they really starting to get their heads around, we were encouraged to see that as organizations moved from this crisis level instruction and support for their users, that they started to grow in sophistication. We started to see much more interest in how do we start to enable the use of our online learning tools, Turnitin and Brightspace being some of them, where we can consider the whole learner experience, where we can think holistically about how are we really creating an engaging experience. Where are we building in tenets from universal design for learning, whether or not people are saying that or not, they're starting to think about those concepts. And, the challenge that we've seen as a provider is how do we make the experience of experimenting and trying something new online as simple as possible? And that simplicity is going to have a different meaning for somebody that's brand new, never used an LMS before, or never used our LMS before. When they go and create an assignment, we don't want to burden them with all kinds of different choices, switches, options, configurations. The cognitive load is already so high when they're using a tool for the first time. We don't want to bog them down into things that they're not ready for. So when we've taken a philosophy towards our front end user experience design, we talk about something called progressive disclosure. And so when somebody goes to create an activity, a learning activity, we ask them just the most basic, simple information we might need from them. What's it called? You know, is it due at a certain date? Are you grading it? And here are some instructions. You're done. And if you're a first user, you know, that's meant to just get you on board. There's no real friction or sand in the gears to do what you want to do. But part of progressive disclosure is not running into a ceiling for those people that are a little more advanced. They know what they want to do, or they're just willing to get a little dirty as they experiment. So for those individuals, we want to let them use the tools that they love. You know, if they really want to have a deep experience and they're looking at annotation and more advanced workflows that we don't provide, we want it to be a first-class citizen for them to bring in the tool that they really enjoy using, get in there, leverage that as part of the data that can get round-tripped into the overall student performance. So, you know, really trying to reduce some of the friction to discovering and utilizing those tools on a day-to-day basis, and supporting the spectrum of users now that throughout COVID, at least from what we've seen, kind of got stretched out. You know, there's a really long tail of people that are new, and the power users just got that much more powerful, that much more sort of enabled because, you know, they were rock stars, they were heroes throughout that 2 years. If I think about what makes me excited above and beyond even that, I think the opportunity for us to start looking at how we can orchestrate data and how we can help start thinking about, you know, where are there opportunities to get that 360-degree view of the learner and all of their different interactions and the great teaching and learning tools that they're part of, whether it's in our LMS, Turnitin, or otherwise. Our customers are starting to understand the importance of bringing all of that context together and looking for vendors like ourselves to collaborate and talk about ways we can do that. And the more that we're making some progress around that, you know, the more it becomes a virtuous cycle as we're engaging our customer communities, hearing from them where the pain points are, and just wrestling those things to the ground.
It's very good.
It's interesting.
So we have, oh, go ahead.
Well, no, you bring up the data piece, and maybe this is where you're going, Bert, a little bit, but like the one thing we're seeing too is that it's not custom, that, what'd you say, was stretched, right? Use that analogy of time, the user base has elongated in terms of their comfort level for different activities. I think we see that with customers, institutions around their data savviness or their investment. Some are building out some institutions are really investing in their own data analytics tooling and solutions. But that said, there's also still, you know, and so we recognize that, you know, as part of the ecosystem that makes up an institution set of tools, how do we contribute the data we have so that you get that 360-degree view of you know, your students, your instructors, you know, the formative or outcomes-based learning, but then also recognize that there are opportunities within our integration to provide sort of a more not, what's the word, like packaged insights, right? Like in a way that is using some course launch and some cool features in LTI to say, hey, we know you're an instructor, you're in a Brightspace course, you care about these 30 students, these 150 students, you can launch into our insights experience and we can tell you what we know about these 130 students. And that may be just around their, you know, actions you can take as an instructor to address, you know, grammar issues or instances of questionable integrity or even like, you know, address, you know, when it comes to formative learning, like actually make decisions, pedagogical decisions that will lead to, like, you know, better outcomes. So I think we're trying to like tackle it from both sides because we recognize that it's not, you know, customers and instructors say, I want more data, but I think the how is really where we have to listen to our customers and understand that we're not just solving one problem and ignoring another or creating another.
Right. Alex, I think that it sounds like you're hearing some of the signals that we are too, and that puts us as a vendor in a somewhat uncomfortable but kind of exciting opportunity where we're being asked to be a little bit more prescriptive at times as well. You know, as a vendor, as someone that has access to so many different institutions and data and interactions, what kind of things would we prescribe, as you say, you know, in terms of to the educator itself, potentially to the learner? And you know, over the years, it's been something as a vendor where we're like, well, you can't smell the chalk on our hands necessarily. We don't know that we have a role in that necessarily. Right. But as a facilitator, as a coordinator of more of those conversations within our user community, we start to get the impression that, you know, there is value in taking a little bit more of that bolder approach and looking at where can we be prescriptive and where can we do some of that short-circuited feedback to know where there is a space to put a human in between, but to have a little bit of intelligence and insight out of that data.
Yeah, it's funny. So the thing I've learned about Turnitin is there's this like sort of I've heard account manager, support rep, like people talk about it this way, but our similarity report that indicates if there is questionable integrity or work is not original, it's always been intended to be interpreted by a human, right? We think there may be similarity here. It's a flag, right? We're trying to create the best experience we can to kind of, improve, solve a problem for an instructor, or improve a conversation. I got a truck going by my window right now. Sorry. And where I'm going with that is, I think, luckily Turnitin actually has some early AI, an early AI investment, because we were doing these matches in this plagiarism section. How do we point those to start to think about models where we can be prescriptive, but also not try to like boil the ocean, right? Like it's hard. Class contexts are very different. Grading scales are very different. Globalization plays a role in and so that data becomes very hard to like, all things are not equal, right? But it is, I think, where as a provider of and a collector of information that Turnitin is, right? Like there are opportunities for us to say, well, wait, we see that instructors that do take, if there are students in scenario A, and instructors have taken this particular action, remediation, or prescribe or given a particular piece of content, there was a specific outcome. That is something that is like sort of more cause and effect, that you can build data models around and build insights models around, and then sort of be more prescribed without running the risk of sort of inferring something that may not resonate in a particular scenario.
Yeah, or perpetuate bias, right?
Perpetuate
which we never
bias,
want to do,
yeah.
but you can get it. Yeah, you can quickly fall into that with a lot of this data that we're all very, very cautious, right, as we wade into that water. Yeah. So one more question, and then we'll invite questions from the audience here. So a lot of folks are always interested in how companies listen to feedback from educators, and then how that is involved in the product strategy. So if you can both talk a little bit about how do you engage your customers, and then how do you take that feedback and roll it into strategy? And Kenneth, we'll start with you this time.
Sounds good. Empathy is the name of the game when it comes to really how we prioritize. What makes us unique, in a sense, is so our Brightspace LMS we actually utilize for K-12 schools, for colleges and universities, and even within corporate learning. So we need to be really careful about understanding the personas and what are the jobs that they're trying to do when they're working within Brightspace. We're big fans of the Clayton Christensen's model that way, because it helps us understand, that we are actually in service of a greater workflow, person, task. It's not about the software. We all know that. So, when we look at how we prioritize and bring in an educator's voice, it's not so much about, we were looking at doing like 25% maintenance and 75% new stuff. It's really looking at who are the individuals that are doing daily work and that have strategic imperatives that come out of these tools. What are the annoyances, the sand in the gears, the obstacles for them actually be able to perform those tasks? And there's a million ways that we can go ahead and get that. I mean, when there are things that are out in the wild and learner-centric, like our mobile app, we are able to read every single comment. We can iterate really, really quickly. We can watch the ratings and the scores, and we can instrument ourselves that way. When it comes into big moving parts, like, an assignment workflow submission within Brightspace, there's tens of thousands of people using that on a daily basis. You don't want to mess that up. You need to make sure that you get that right. You satisfy that really wide spectrum of use cases. So we spend a lot of time doing really early upfront conceptual conversations with advisory boards. There we talk to executives from an academic perspective, from an IT perspective, all the way down to practitioners, instructional designers, and faculty. There we try to understand really, what are they trying to fit into their day-to-day life? How does that meet their overall organizational context? We shadow people. We watch people as they use Brightspace for the first time and understand where we thought we had a conceptual model really well laid out and nailed, where they just get stuck in a rut, and we understand, where there's some of those corners that we can round. We have a community site called Brightspace Community, and in there's PI, the Product Ideas Exchange. So, our R&D team is always hungry for PI. Our customers go in there and they vote on the fixes, the usability enhancements, the new features. They have dialogue about it. They vote it up and down. And then what we really look at are themes. When we take all of those different inputs and those channels collectively, we look at what are the real themes, the signal for the noise that's coming out as we talk to all of these customers. And over the last little while, that a singular theme has been simplification, easy, take the sand out of the gears, particularly for those educators. And so when we look at those Brightspace community ideas, when we look at things we hear about in advisory boards and support tickets, we look at the holistic view of, okay, this is a whole tool and a workflow that we need to look at. Some of this is going to be brand new. Some of these will be corners we round. Some we can do really immediately on a monthly basis. Some will take a full year. And so once we figured out what we want to do and I've heard our educators, our users, and we know kind of how we want to build that into the roadmap, we spend a ton of time and energy on change management. And so when we have a new way of completing a task or doing a really key activity or workflow, like creating an assignment, we don't push out brand new jarring capabilities without people being able to test those and soak in them. So we have an opt-in flag within Brightspace where when there's a brand new version of a tool, you can flip on the new experience, you can create things in it, you can see if it kind of works for you. And if it's not quite there yet, when you switch back, everything you created is still there. There's no data migration. We try to do things really in place. So there's a strong sense of confidence and integrity that if I'm trying this new thing, they're committed to it, they're going to finish it. And I can give them feedback that's going to result in forward motion. So it's obviously a really continuous and iterative process, but when that change management piece at the end isn't there, we've found that we've just lost the ability to gain what we thought was the advantage in new capabilities, and instead we've made things harder. So, you know, a good, sometimes 13 months of soaking and testing a new workflow before it's turned on by default is what's necessary. And we've really embraced that and found that amount of time can help us really understand some great problems to solve in the meantime.
Yeah, great. I just want to remind everyone, we'll let Alex jump in here, answer that question too, but by all means, if anyone else has questions, you can send them in chat. I'll read them off, or we'll invite folks to unmute here in a moment.
Yeah, I won't ramble beyond a lot of what Ken said. I mean, can you describe some of the things that Turnitin is trying to do with our customer lifecycle, right? And figuring out where to, you know, we recognize that we're hired essentially to do something, to solve a problem, right? And so really when we're working with, you know, an instructor or an advisory board, something similar to something I was doing earlier this week, it's sort of like, you know, not just about figuring out, well, what is this particular, what should this integration do, but what is the bigger like impetus for why, right? Like, why are we concerned that there is a potential integrity issue, or why are instructors really struggling with the scale of grading and grade scope is a good fit? And so I think that's a big piece, you know, to sort of the lens that we use in the early stages of the model Ken described. I think, you know, Turnitin has a product called GradeScope that was a startup, at least more than Turnitin is, and you know, adopting some of those practices have been very useful to the company, right? And like really, you know, getting a mechanism in place for our customers to send us feedback via Trello and vote on things. We have public Trello boards that then our product managers can use to make decisions that are really more like to understand how can we have the biggest impact in sort of the smallest increment of delivery and get the most value to the customer quickly. So that's some of the things that I think we're really turning the volume up on in 2022 with our new product leadership. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think I should have just hit the right button so people can unmute themselves if people would like to ask questions, or they can go ahead and type them in chat here. We'll give it a moment. I have a question if no one else does, but I'd like to see if others do first. Okay, question from Karen. Can data from GradeScope integrate with Canvas data?
I think I need to know more in terms of what you mean. I will, so Karen, do you want to come off mute and describe a little more, or do you want me to just take a crack at it? I think you may still be on mute.
Yeah, here, let me try a different method here. Ask all to unmute. So there, Karen.
There you go.
There we go. Now. Woo!
Yeah.
So I'm interested in data, of course, like everybody is. And data's all over the place. It's a drag. I don't know how else to say it. And I'm interested because Canvas data is kind of messy and I'm cleaning that up. I haven't used Gradescope enough, but my thoughts are if I want to invest in these wonderful integrations, I want the data to come together for me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. And so,
sometimes I think I'm crazy. Data here, data there. Where do I download that? I'll merge it with that. And then afterwards, I'm not even sure how people want to use it anyway. So I just throw my hands up.
Right. Well, and that's probably the biggest problem. Like figuring out that use case is really hard, right? Because with data, as soon as you spend time, this is what I've found, but as soon as you spend time building an analytics report or gold plating some version, someone's like, well, I actually wanted this too. And it's like, so how do what we're trying to do at Turnitin is from a platform perspective, figure out how to make data, I was gonna say data acquisition, but pulling data, right, more self-service, right? What BI tools can we put into the hands of our administrators, of our customer, of our instructors, so that they can run their own reports in a little more of a flexible way? LTI 1.3 is actually working in Gradescope and to kind of get at your question, because we have a lot more context of the Canvas information, right? So we know more about the course that Gradescope assignment is in, and we can give that contextual information, the Canvas course ID, the Canvas user ID, the Canvas assignment resource link ID back to our institutions in a way that then they can marry that data into existing data sets or other data, right? So you may still have, in the way we're trying to go about that is investing in like what we call data exhaust, right? APIs that institutions can actually just bring that data into, because they're making these investments, their data lakes or their sort of a business analyst sort of departments that they're standing up, right? So that when we do have an exhaust available, we give you something to link back up to other data sets, right? That's I think the thing that you've probably struggled with. It's great. Oh, I can pull a CSV from this application and I can go pull a CSV from that application, but they don't know enough about each other for me to actually say, oh, this is the same student, this is the same assignment or the same course, and I see these patterns. And so that's really what we recognize as our big sort of investment going forward when it comes to data and analytics, is taking a platform approach. So it's not just we don't solve that for just Gradescope. We solve it for Feedback Studio. We solve it for all of our products. And as a school, you don't have to manage multiple data integrations. You get to sort of get the Turnitin feed, so to speak.
Okay. The data point I'm really interested in is learning outcomes.
Yeah. Well,
so that's I'm just going to throw that out there, and and that's maybe a personal point, but learning outcomes to me are at course level and can be at program level, and if I'm taking the time to design those learning outcomes into a curriculum and then mapping them from a course, and then I'm using a tool in that course, I want that tool, I want to be able to use those outcomes that I've designed. And then and now we're granular in that assignment or that assessment, whatever it is. And I can see how it works all the way up then from the individual student to how that whole course is running.
To the department, right? Yep.
That's my magical.
Yeah. No, I know where you're going with that. And I think the most important thing at the core product level, right, at the most granular level, forget about integrations and how we deliver the data, is making sure those outcomes are being tagged, right, and captured at the right level. With Gradescope, for example, like in the K-12 market, Gradescope's mostly a higher ed product. Some of the early research that we've been doing shows that, hey, look, mastery-based, like having standards tagging is like a showstopper, right? It is table stakes to enter into a K-12 market, right? And so we're being very careful that we don't just say, hey, we have a great assessment product, but we haven't thought about the admin persona, right? To Ken's point, we haven't thought about the persona of a maybe, you know, a department head who really wants to understand that what's happening across their courses. And so if those dashboards or those reports can't be run, you can have great functionality at the course level, at the assignment level. The instructors are really happy, but you know, there's going to be a disconnect in terms of understanding the efficacy of an experience, an assessment, a product, right? Content that's being created. So that's a big thing for us is making sure that the product captures it at the most granular level so we can roll it up in the future.
I think something that makes that difficult too, just in where the current state of ed tech and in particular the LMSs in general is, you know, the architecture of your typical LMS right now is based around a course offering.
Yeah.
And you know, the outcomes and the activities and the human beings that are part of that are kind of all placed into that architectural or that entity context, rather than you know, breaking that model and looking at things as learning activities and that can be self-contained, that can have their own knowledge and services that understand how to emit and how to consume data, how to track completion, and how to progress along in context with other learning activities. You know, we think that architectures that start to take a more activity-driven model are going to be more valuable or more malleable. You know, where you can take materials, activities, and reuse them in different contexts and for different individuals, but that can also be more open and decentralized in how they share data with other applications. So, you know, as Alex was talking about some of those exhausts that Turnitin is putting out, that's something that D2L has been building into our data platform. Is there's lots of systems that people leave the LMS for, do some really interesting work, and then come back, and there's only very limited context that comes from that. So we've been building out a data ecosystem that can actually consume the exhaust from those other tools and be built in with the context of Brightspace data. So there's some of that traceability, some of that joining is happening more naturally than having to happen at the hands of every single client.
Yeah, we see a lot of that at the Unison side as well, and that we talk about the pandemic a lot throughout this 2-day summit, right? And one of the things we've seen is that there's a more diverse use of tools in any single sort of course experience now, right? A lot of people were using an LMS or an LMS maybe plus one, right? Another tool. Now we see people using the LMS plus 3 to 5 different tools, and understanding that ecosystem from a data perspective gets really hard because each individual tool is getting better at delivering that tool's analytics. Right. But right. You know, it's not helpful if you have 5 tools with 5 silos of data, right? It's that crosswalkability, and how do you try and stitch that together, which is important but tricky, right? And
I think it's our job as tool providers, right, in creating that symbiotic relationship again, really to be responsible, right, and make sure that that data governance is considered early on, right? Let's not the worst thing that can happen for our users is that we step on each other's toes, right? And I think really trying to understand, it's not about staying in your lane or but even a great, if an institution is making the decision that in their ecosystem, Brightspace is the sort of the center of collaboration and collects the majority of the data, it really makes sense for them to build their analytics model or the tools that they want to give to their instructors around the inertia that Brightspace has, right? And so as a tool provider, how do we supplement that? How do we complement that data, right? So that it's there. And so we want to build exhausts in a very general way in case someone wants to sort of build their own or use something off the shelf. They sort of have that flexibility.
Absolutely. I have about 9 minutes left. Other questions? That was a good question, Karen. Thank you.
I love the way you call it data exhaust, by the way. I
did not. Yeah. I don't think Ken and we did not come up with that.
I'm giving you credit for it,
Alex. It's funny. So Turnitin recently acquired a product called ExamSoft. They're responsible for most of the bar exams in the US. And, psychometrics is a big part of, these are sit down, closed, high stakes assessments. A lot of data is collected at scale. You don't get many opportunities where an entire state gives the same exam on the same day. And so that company, a big priority in ExamSoft and sort of some of the learning they're bringing to Turnitin is around these big program providers, right? That is a must-have, right? Having a psychometric exhaust and understand like how the students are performing on these long written answers, questions, or multiple choice, hundreds of multiple choice is really key. And so, I think that's an area where Turnitin's learning a lot from one of our acquisitions. Because in the past, our similarity, just doing plagiarism checking, Turnitin's, thinking about delivering data back to the customer I don't think has historically been Turnitin's strong suit in the plagiarism space, right? But as we become more of a well-rounded assessment provider, we want to get that right.
So I don't see any questions here in chat. I wanted to ask one question, as we've talked a lot about the change management process, right? People coming in and making sure you're listening and making sure you don't sort of roll things out, surprise people, all of those kinds of things. There's another challenge too that we sometimes run into, especially when we talk about the artificial intelligence piece, is, how do we make sure we're not out innovating the market to a degree, right? To sort of grabbing that shiny machine learning, natural language processing and plugging it into things and being really sort of just amazed at what we can do and then kind of running with it and maybe running too far. How do you kind of balance that desire to kind of really push that and go really far with these new technologies, but also not sort of getting so far out ahead that we miss the mark? And Kenneth, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think that's the whole rear view mirror of my career behind me is littered with stories of those. 2002, D2L built Palm apps to be able to access the LMS mobile. Yeah,
haven't heard that in a while.
Imagine the adoption that we got in 2002 of those Palm devices. So that was one. No, a really good example for us. Around getting enamored with our own ideas. It really came in the analytics space for us. Rewind about 5 years ago, we were doing a lot on building predictive models for student success. So we would look at what's historical performance from a learner, what are their entrance exams, let's make a prediction on whether they're going to underperform or underdeliver, and here's why, and some interventions. Really great stuff. We still support it. It's in market today. And we were doing some work around adaptive learning, doing a context-sensitive search around materials and building that outcomes assessment, content trial. It's really great stuff. But it's a little ahead of the game in terms of some people's readiness to trust the algorithm and just how it's built into our tooling. But about 4 or 5 years ago, that was our roadmap for analytics. We were going deep and we were going to continue to push hard on some of these AI and machine learning enabled apps, both right in front of learners and in front of educators. We decided, well, this is a big investment. Let's form an advisory board and talk to some of our customers that are using these tools right now, and let's see what they want. And we presented them with, here's our whiteboard, here's our queue of everything that we're working on. And at the end of that 3-hour advisory board, they had scratched everything out and they had said, build us a data access hub, build us the proper infrastructure for us to be able to get all of our data out in proper context with integrity and at scale and with freshness that we're looking for. Do that extremely well. Then you can talk to us about dashboards and visualizations. And once you're finished with those things and we're all happy and we're moving some baseline stuff, let's go back and talk to these other pieces. And we're 4 years later, and that roadmap and that team has just been lockstep with that advisory board since then, because we know we're solving problems people need to solve.
Yeah. It's funny you asked about AI too. That's a real concern, right? I think my answer was going to be listening, right? Listen, and that's basically what you just said too, Ken, right? Listen to our customers, listen to our users, don't make assumptions. And sometimes you have that shiny new thing and you're just so excited about it. I think, and I've sort of seen this from the sidelines a little bit with Gradescope, again, in the K-12 market, because it's such an obvious fit where, especially just sort of the contracting or the ebb and the flow of the coming out of the last 2 years in online assessment practices. But as instructors are K-12 specifically moving back to the classroom in a lot of ways, the notion of I'm grading 100 paper-based homeworks that night, right? I have 3 classes and I'm going page by page and I'm doing question 1, 2, 3 for student A, and then I'm doing question 1, 2, and 3 for student B. We're like, Gradescope is an amazing fit, right? Like Gradescope allows students to submit paper-based work to digital, take a picture of it with their app on their phone, whatever it is, the instructor could scan it, and then the instructor can grade all the group 1s, right? All the question 1s, 100 question 1s, and have a dynamic rubric that's sort of saying, oh, you know what? A lot of students are getting this wrong. And we're always so excited to present this. And the first question always back, like the first concern that always comes back is like, are you like, where do you draw the line, right? Like, where are you starting to work the instructor out of the ability to stay flexible and infer things that like an algorithm can't, right? You know, sure, you can, you know, take a point off because someone left off a lot of students are, you know, take something out of your rubric because a lot of students are missing covalent bonds, right? Or missed a particular bond in a chemistry diagram. But knowing the student and knowing that, hey, maybe there's something else going on there or something we're never going to be able to replace, right? And so figuring out how to like enhance, you know, provide more contextual information that then could supplement the human experience is the thing we keep hearing back. And so we're listening to that. Maybe we're not going too far down a particular path, like Ken's example too.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot in our Unison communities about the difference between data-driven and data-informed, and that we want data-informed, right? There's always a place for the human there that knows things the data will never be able to kind of, you know, represent. So we always want to be in that data-informed space, and very rarely, if ever, in that data-driven space.
Aren't we all consumers of this today? We look at Amazon. What do we look at? Reviews. We look at stars. We look at, oh, people who bought this also bought that. Right. But that's just about being informed, right? Like no one's clicking buy for you. Right. And so that's you gotta, you want to make sure that you're doing a good job at providing, especially in education, providing sort of the most context you can without, you know, leading.
Yeah, absolutely. We're at the top of the hour. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Alex. This was really informational, a great discussion. Glad you could be here. And thank you, everyone, for stopping by. And one more session. Enjoy the rest of the summit, and then enjoy your weekends. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.